To understand the calculation, you have to rewind 4 hours. 4 hours before I became an orphan via text message, I was the perfect daughter. I was hosting my parents, Richard and Susan's 40th wedding anniversary dinner. Of course I was hosting. I organized it, I paid for it. It was held in the Heritage City apartment, the one my company's financials kept from foreclosure. The air was thick with the smell of expensive catering and unspoken obligations. I'd brought a bottle of wine that cost more than my first car, the requisite offering of the successful child. My brother Caleb, 34, and perpetually on the verge of his next big idea, was there. His wife, Morgan, sat beside him, her eyes scanning the room like an appraiser. My mother, Susan, was playing the gracious hostess, refilling glasses and manufacturing warmth. My father, Richard, stood at the head of the table. He cleared his throat, holding his glass. "A toast," he said. The room went quiet. His toasts were never just toasts. They were policy announcements. 40 years, he said, looking at my mother. And to celebrate, Caleb has some wonderful news. He's finally launching his business. Morgan glowed, turning to pat Caleb's arm. Caleb just grinned, that easy smile he uses when the bill is coming and I'm at the table. My father continued, his eyes landing on me. And as a gift, for 40 years of this family, Eliza has agreed to help him secure the financing. I kept my smile perfectly still. The wine in my glass suddenly tasted like vinegar. What financing? It's just the startup capital, Eliza. My mother jumped in, her voice all smooth denial. Just a small loan to get him on his feet? $85,000, Caleb said, like it was nothing. The bank just needs a cosigner, a formality. A formality. $85,000. Look, Caleb said, leaning forward, you're my sister. You've got perfect credit. It's not like it costs you anything. Morgan chimed in, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. Exactly. It's just your name. I mean, you run a whole company. This is small stuff for you. And that's when it happened, the click. The moment the sound in the room fades and you see everything with perfect, cold clarity. They weren't looking at Eliza, their daughter, their sister. They were looking at an asset. I realized, in that moment, that I had been objectified by my own family. I wasn't a person at the table. I was a function. I was an 800 credit score. I was a financial guarantee. They weren't asking for help. They were leveraging a resource. My success wasn't something to be proud of. It was something to be harvested. My father saw the hesitation in my eyes. His face hardened. "Don't make this difficult, Eliza," he said, his voice low and managerial. "He's your brother. It's just a signature." I looked at Caleb, who wouldn't meet my eyes. I looked at Morgan, who was already mentally spending the money. I looked at my mother, who was smiling that desperate, please keep the peace smile. And finally, I looked at my father, the man who saw his family as a corporation and me as its most profitable, non-voting shareholder. I placed my wine glass on the table. The sound was a tiny, sharp click in the silence. "No," I said. The smiles vanished. The air crystallized. "What did you say?" Richard's voice was sharp. I said no, I will not be co-signing the loan. And that was the spark that lit the fuse. The fallout didn't wait. I woke up the next morning, not to an alarm, but to silence. A thick, heavy quiet I hadn't realized I was missing. My phone was dark. For a few minutes, I just lay there, breathing air that felt like it had more oxygen in it. Then, the first echo. A text from Caleb at 7:03 a.m. "You're overreacting. Dad was just mad. Turn Mom's card back on." I stared at the words. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "Can we talk?" Not, "I'm sorry." It was an instruction, a command dressed as advice. He wasn't apologizing for the ambush. He was annoyed that I'd messed up his funding. I deleted the message. I didn't reply. The second echo came an hour later, a voicemail from my mother, Susan. Her voice was thick with manufactured tears, the ones she uses to signal a crisis she expects me to solve. Eliza, I just don't know what you've done. She wept into the phone. You've created such a mess. Your father he's just so embarrassed. That poor apartment manager called. I've never been so humiliated. You have to call the bank, sweetheart. You have to call them and fix this. Just call me. We need to fix what you've done. I listened to it twice. The word sorry was conspicuously absent. This wasn't an apology. It was an invoice for my emotional labor. She wasn't upset about what they did. She was upset that I had finally sent the bill. My compassion had been a line of credit they'd overdrafted for years, and they were furious that the bank had finally cut them off. But the main event, the grand performance, came from my father. He didn't call, he didn't text, he went public. My Aunt Diane, the one who divorced her way to freedom years ago, sent me the screenshot, a public post on my father's Facebook page, Richard, the patriarch, performing his role as the wounded king. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. It is a sad day when a child forgets the hands that raised them, it began. He waxed poetic about loyalty, which in his dictionary was just a synonym for obedience. He talked about family values, which meant valuing the family's image above all else. He finished with the classic. Some people value money and success more than blood. We are heartbroken, but we will pray for them. The comments were exactly what you'd expect. So sorry you're going through this, Richard. Praying for you. The younger generation is just so selfish. He was trying to socially isolate me, to paint me as the cold, greedy daughter, so that when the financial details came out, I would be the villain. This was their strategy. Not remorse, escalation. Caleb's text meant, your boundaries are inconvenient for me. Susan's voicemail meant, you've exposed the mess I was happy to ignore. Richard's post meant, if I can't control you, I will destroy your reputation. They weren't sorry. They were just sorry they'd lost control. I read the post again. Heartbroken. Blood. Loyalty. These words were just currency, and I was no longer accepting their exchange rate. I didn't reply to the post. I didn't call my mother back. I didn't text Caleb. Instead, I forwarded the screenshot of my father's post to Marcus, my CFO. This is what we're dealing with. It's time to escalate. It's time to escalate. My father's Facebook post was a declaration of war, so I responded like a strategist. The next morning, I didn't go to my office. I went to Marcus's. Marcus is my chief financial officer, a man who views the world in spreadsheets and balance sheets. He's 40, sharp, and has zero tolerance for emotional nonsense. He'd been warning me for years, in polite, professional terms, that my family investments were a non-performing asset. I walked in and placed my phone on his desk, the Facebook post glowing. He read it. He didn't sigh. He didn't say, I told you so. He just looked up at me, his eyes cold and analytical. Well, he said, it seems your Goodwill account has finally been declared bankrupt. What's the protocol for this? That's what I'm here to find out, I said. They believe I'm an emotional resource. I need to remind them I am a legal entity. Good. He spun to his computer. Let's start with the outstanding liabilities. That student loan you co-signed for Caleb 10 years ago, the one he defaulted on. I nodded. A $12,000 debt I had quietly paid off to protect my own credit, right before I launched my company. A debt he'd forgotten about. You never had him sign a repayment agreement, Marcus stated. It wasn't a question. It was family, I said, the words tasting like ash. It's not anymore, Marcus replied. It's a debt. We're calling it in. This wasn't revenge, it was accounting. Within an hour, Marcus had our corporate lawyer on a conference call. The instructions were simple. Draft a formal letter of demand for the $12,000, plus interest, payable within 30 days. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Julia, agreed. However, she said, a judge will want to see that we've made a good faith effort. Does he have any ability to pay? He's asking for a new loan, correct? For $85,000? Correct, I said. Let's request his business plan for that new venture, Julia suggested. Officially, it's to assess his future income for a repayment plan. Off the record, I want to see what kind of fantasy he's selling. The business plan arrived in my inbox 2 hours later, forwarded by Caleb's increasingly nervous loan officer. I opened the file, and I froze. It wasn't a fantasy, it was an attack. The name on the proposal was Caleb's Premier Events. He wasn't planning to open a restaurant. He wasn't starting a tech company. He was planning to open a low-budget, direct competitor to my company in my city. He was asking me to finance my own replacement. He was planning to use my $85,000 guarantee to steal my clients. My blood didn't boil. It turned to ice. I was about to call Marcus when a second email came through from Julia, the lawyer. The subject line was just one word, Eliza. I opened it. It was a forwarded file from the bank. It wasn't the new loan application. It was the old one, the one Caleb had submitted 3 weeks before the anniversary dinner, the one that had been rejected. Julia's note was brief. They rejected him. Look at page 5. The list of secured assets. He tried to list 2 of your company's vehicles and a portion of your business operating account as collateral. I scrolled to page 5, and there it was, my company's assets, listed in black and white, and at the bottom of the page, in the box marked co-signer's signature, was a clumsy digital scrawl. My name? He had forged my signature. This wasn't just entitlement. This wasn't just a toxic family. This was fraud. This was a crime. The thing about pulling a financial thread is you never know what's attached to it. When I revoked my name as the guarantor on the heritage apartment, I knew it would cause a problem. I just didn't expect the problem to show up at my office lobby on a Tuesday. I was in the middle of a client presentation when my assistant buzzed my intercom. Eliza, your mother is here. She doesn't have an appointment and she's refusing to leave. I felt nothing. No panic, no dread, just logistics. Let her wait, I said. I'll be out in 10. When I walked out, the woman in my lobby was not the matriarch from the 40th anniversary dinner. That woman was proud, controlling, and wrapped in expensive cashmere. This woman, my mother, Susan, was a wreck. Her eyes were red and puffy, her hair was a mess, she was twisting her hands together, a picture of manufactured panic. The moment she saw me, she rushed forward. Eliza, thank God, you have to stop this. My lobby is glass and steel. My staff was watching. I didn't move toward her. Stop what, Susan? Using her first name hit her like a splash of cold water. She flinched. The apartment, Eliza, the heritage, they're evicting us. We got a notice. 30 days? Your father, he's a mess. I kept my voice low and steady. That's what happens when the lease guarantor is no longer guaranteeing the lease. But you can't, she wailed, her voice rising. That's our home. It's the family legacy. It's an apartment you can't afford, I said, and it's been financially tied to my company for 3 years. I'm untangling it. Caleb told us it was your fault, she cried, pointing a shaking finger at me. He said you're doing this just to punish him, to punish us for that loan. She was still blaming me. Even now, standing in the lobby of the company I built, she was convinced I was the problem, that my no was an act of aggression, and their demand had been reasonable. "Eliza, please," she begged, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. She grabbed my arm. I pulled it away. "You have to do something," she pleaded. "You're our daughter. You're the only one who can fix this. Do something for your family." There it was, the magic phrase, the guilt-wrapped shackle they'd used to chain me my entire life. Do it for the family. I looked at this woman, my mother, and I didn't see family. I saw a co-conspirator. I saw the woman who had hearted the message that disowned me. I turned to my desk, picked up the intercom, and buzzed my head of security. "David, I need you in the main lobby, please." Susan's face went white. "Security? You're calling on me? You're a non-employee causing a disturbance in my place of business," I said, my voice clinical. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a manila envelope, the one Julia had prepared. I didn't hand it to her. I placed it on the reception desk between us. "You asked me to do something," I said. "I already did." She looked at the envelope, confused. "That," I said, "is a copy of a report detailing how Caleb forged my signature on a loan application 3 weeks ago, attempting to commit bank fraud using my company as collateral. And underneath that is a formal demand for the $12,000 he defaulted on 10 years ago, the one I paid to protect my credit." She stared at the papers, her mouth opening and closing. The tears stopped. The panic was gone. There was only calculation. The security guard, David, a large man who looked perpetually unimpressed, arrived at my side. "Ms. Eliza, problem?" I looked at Susan. Her eyes were no longer begging. They were cold. She knew, in that moment, that the game was over. The power flip was absolute. She wasn't here to negotiate my surrender. She was here to witness her own. "No problem, David," I said. "This individual was just leaving." I looked at my mother one last time. "Goodbye, Susan." I turned, walked back toward the conference room, and didn't look back. The glass door clicked shut behind me, silencing whatever she might have said next. The aftermath wasn't a war, it was a demolition. When you remove the single load-bearing wall, the rest of the structure doesn't argue. It just collapses. My father, Richard, didn't post any more vague philosophy on Facebook. The eviction notice was too concrete. The heritage apartment they'd clung to as a symbol of their status was gone in 30 days. They couldn't afford it. They never could. I was the one affording it. They sold off most of the antique furniture, the legacy, to cover the deposit on a small rental condo 2 towns over. Somewhere, their social circle wouldn't see them. My phone was silent, except for one text. It came from my Aunt Diane, my father's sister, the one who had divorced her way out of a toxic marriage 20 years ago and had been quietly tolerated, but never embraced ever since. The message was short. "About time, Eliza. Your grandmother would have been proud." That was it. It was everything. Caleb, my brother, the catalyst, he didn't get the $85,000 loan. Instead, he got a visit from Julia, my lawyer. It wasn't a negotiation. She presented him with the forged loan application. She explained the legal penalties for bank fraud. She showed him the proof of his intent to compete directly with my company. Then, she offered him a generous alternative to criminal charges. He signed a legally binding repayment agreement for the $12,000 I had paid on his defaulted student loan 10 years prior. Will I ever see that money? Probably not. But the signature wasn't for the money. It was for the admission. It was his confession, in ink, that the debt was real. His free ride was officially over. That night, I sat in my apartment. The silence was deep. My boyfriend, Leo, was working late. It was just me. I opened my laptop. I didn't open my work email. I opened a file I hadn't touched in weeks. A private document. A spreadsheet I'd started 5 years ago. I called it my sanity ledger. It was a list, line by line, of every time family had cost me, every emergency I was expected to solve. Caleb, car repair, $900. Mom, lost credit card bill, $1,250. Dad, property tax shortfall, $4,200. Caleb, dental emergency, $2,100. 57 entries. 57 entries. 57 times I had been the solution. 57 times I had subsidized their fantasy that they were self-sufficient, all while they quietly resented me for the success that was funding them. I stared at the total at the bottom, a number that made my stomach clench. This spreadsheet, this was my proof, the evidence I kept to remind myself that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't being selfish or unreasonable, that the slow financial bleed was real. I'd held on to it for years, like a weapon, like the manila envelope I'd brought to the office. But looking at it now, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel justified. I just felt tired. It wasn't a weapon anymore. It was just a record of bad debt. My cursor hovered over the file. This wasn't accounting. This was history, and I was done with it. I hit the delete key. I watched the file vanish. Then I emptied the recycle bin. It was gone. For the first time, I didn't need the proof. I didn't need the justification. The absence of their noise was all the evidence I needed. I closed the laptop. The apartment was still quiet, but it wasn't empty. It was peaceful. The first few weeks were loud, not with noise, but with the lack of it. I lived in a state of phantom limb syndrome, my thumb constantly checking for text messages that weren't there, my stomach tensing every time my phone buzzed, bracing for the next wave of guilt, the next emergency, the next manufactured crisis. But nothing came. The silence wasn't an ambush. It was just space. By the second week, that space started to feel like peace. By the third, it felt like oxygen. My boyfriend Leo noticed it. We were at dinner at our favorite Italian place, the one where I usually spent half the time texting under the table. He put his wine glass down and just looked at me, a small smile on his face. "What?" I asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Your phone," he said, nodding toward my purse. "It hasn't buzzed once. You haven't checked it in an hour. You're actually here." He raised his glass. "To being here." I clinked my glass against his. "To being here." And I was, fully. The next Monday, I walked into a pitch for the biggest contract of my career, a massive tech conference. Before, I would have been split in two, half my brain in the room, the other half on standby, listening for the inevitable fire alarm from my family. But that day, I was just all there. I was focused, I was sharp, I was clear. I wasn't just presenting, I was present. I walked out 2 hours later with the signed contract. It was a career-defining win. When I told Marcus, my CFO, he didn't even look up from his screen. He just said, "Amazing what you can accomplish when you're not funding a hostile takeover in your spare time." He meant Caleb, but I knew he also meant my entire family. That night, I stood on my balcony, looking out at the city lights. I thought about that text message. "You are no longer a daughter of this family." I thought about the guilt I was supposed to feel, the crushing weight of shame. But there was none. We are raised to believe that cutting ties with family is the ultimate act of cruelty, a sign that you are cold or broken or selfish. We're taught that blood is a bond that excuses all behavior, a lifetime contract for you to be their emotional and financial punching bag. As I stood there, the cool air on my face, I realized that was the biggest lie of all. Letting go of a toxic relationship, even one you were born into, is not an act of hate. It is an act of profound self-preservation. It's not about abandoning them. It's about finally refusing to abandon yourself. It is not a failure. It is the bravest, most painful, and most necessary form of success. You are not letting go of a bloodline. You are finding yourself. I went back inside. I tore a sticky note from a pad on my desk. I wrote down a new policy, a new truth. I stuck it right on my computer monitor, where I would see it every day. This story, this was for you. If you are the one who is always handling it, the one who is always competent, always responsible, and always the last one to be asked how you're doing. If you are the one who is loved for what you do, not for who you are, the one who has been objectified into a solution, a resource, or a credit score. If you are tired, just so tired, of being the strong one, this is your permission. This is your sign that your boundaries are not an act of aggression. They are not cruel. They are not selfish. They are a profound, necessary, and brave act of survival. They are the moment you finally stop abandoning yourself. So, who are you? And what is the first boundary you are going to set just for you? Let me know in the comments. And if you know someone else who feels like they're living on the sidelines of their own life, please share this story with them. Let them know they aren't alone.